situation at Kabul airport is becoming increasingly desperate and deadly for the thousands of Afghans and foreign nationals trying to escape the Taliban. But it's also taking a painful toll on the soldiers sent there to help them.
Amidst the chaos, PBS News Hour international correspondent Jane Ferguson has been documenting what she sees as the compassion being shown by British and Allied troops on what's become a humanitarian mission on a scale that hadn't been anticipated. And Jane joins us now from Kabul. Good morning to you. We're also joined by former head of counter-terrorism at the MOD, Major General Chapman. Good morning to both of you. Jane, if we can come to you first. We are talking to you live from Kabul, which in itself seems an extraordinary thing, given the pictures that we are seeing. How safe do you feel where you are right now? And what have you seen, which is the harrowing pictures firsthand that we are seeing here on television?
Well, I'm about as safe as anybody's going to be in the airport area. I'm in an area with the British soldiers here right at the airport. It's not on the runway, it's still outside. And they're basically, this is a place where they're bringing people in and processing them so that they can then take them to the airstrip where they can hopefully board the flights that are waiting for them. But, you know, it's a very volatile situation outside. You know, let's not forget this whole area is still surrounded by the Taliban. You have an ISIS presence in this country. You have a situation that's extraordinarily unstable. And so you also have the fact that this is unprecedented. None of us, all of us veteran war reporters have been trying to rack our brains as to whether or not anyone has experienced anything like this before. And we just absolutely haven't seen the likes of it. And so from a security standpoint, that has a huge impact. Every day, people are having to reassess, you know, what's safe and what's not.
Do you feel safe as you move around?
I feel safe from the perspective that there are so many international forces here. You know, I'm surrounded by British paratroopers, which is a decent place to be if you're trying to feel safe. There's also the US military, but whenever you're out in the crowds, like once you step outside, which is only a matter of sort of a couple of hundred yards from here, it's extremely difficult to feel 100% safe. Not necessarily, ironically, from the Taliban threat. It's a very bizarre and surreal atmosphere because you have Taliban fighters and commanders wandering around trying to coordinate this as well. They're not too happy when they see, you know, a Western female, and they often like shoo me away. But I don't feel a threat from them. But the danger is always panicked, desperate crowds. That is simply a dangerous situation anywhere in the world. People are very panicked. Some soldiers are jumpy and nervous. There's a lot of firing guns in the air throughout the day to try to control the crowds. And so it's one of those situations where you've got crowd control with massive automatic weapons, and that's never very safe for anybody.
That's surprising that firing a gun in the air can succeed as crowd control, isn't it? It's a question I want to ask both of you, really. Major General Chapman, you served in the parachute regiment, which is involved in getting people onto the aeroplanes at Kabul airport. And we've seen these images of babies being handed over razor wire. We know they're working in extreme heat, but the British soldiers are showing a huge amount of compassion. And there's an image now that we're all now very familiar with. Is that dealing with families, dealing with babies, dealing with children, dealing with stressed human beings in a crisis like this? Are they trained for that?
Well, they are, and in a difficult situation, the only thing that can protect you are your ethics and morals. Now, it's 16 Air Assault Brigade with 2 para, with A and C Company 3 para on the ground. And they are the global contingency force, and they do training across the spectrum of operations from humanitarian, including crowd control, peacekeeping, peacemaking, up to war fighting. And of course, the core values of the British Army include respect for others, which is treating everyone with dignity in order to maintain your legitimacy and trust. And that's exactly what we need to do at the moment, because consent, particularly from the Taliban, is fragile, particularly if you've got a ticking clock with the 31st of August at the moment, sort of cut-off time from an American perspective. And let's be clear, America is still the indispensable nation, and we will not or could not be there on our own without the Americans there. They have 5,000 troops, we have 1,000 troops, and remember that they've just activated their US Civil Reserve Air Fleet, 18 civilian aircraft, are going to come in from America to enable them to take out more. They do things on a scale which the British Army and the British Defence Establishment simply cannot do.
And Jane, we understand that the last British flight was due to be tomorrow, but that's now been put back until perhaps Friday or Saturday to allow for more time, because there are, you know, at least 600 interpreters who were employed by Britain to work for the government and to help all our NGOs and diplomats out there and all of their families who we are duty-bound, morally and otherwise, to bring them home. Do you get a sense there that with every hour that passes, that deadline is crushing? I mean, literally crushing at times, actually.
Absolutely. There is a sense of panic amongst the crowds. They know that every day that passes is a day less for them to make it to the flight. And ironically, that's what's making this situation so much worse, because people are rushing to the gates. They're rushing to the airport to try to get on a plane because they don't want to miss this opportunity. They're frightened. But as a result, that the crushes cause the delays. They can't open the gates and process people whenever it's a near stampede out there. So that's what's really causing this. But the deadline is not necessarily looking like a realistic one for getting people out, either for the Americans or the Brits, whenever it comes to not only interpreters, but their families, sorting through those people who have worked with, let's not forget that this is going to be broader than just interpreters, especially for the Americans. They're also going to be looking for people who've worked with USAID and aid agencies. What about people who've worked with the United Nations? Right. The messaging that's been given to people is quite vague. So many people feel like they do have a fair chance of getting on a plane. So that means more people are coming to the airport. And that means the deadline is looking more and more unrealistic.
And also, just to extend that point further, as in what about other people? Is we have something like 18 million women in Afghanistan that are basically going to be left to their fate under the Taliban, seemingly as a consequence of a decision made by Joe Biden, someone who is progressive and empathetic, someone who appointed the first female vice president, seems to be leaving, prioritising only Americans and leaving these people to their fate, as well as the people that you just mentioned. We have cameras around the Kabul airport. It's an enormous country, Jane. What are the stories we're not seeing? What else is happening around that country that we're unable to capture with our cameras?
Well, the rest of the city in Kabul is relatively calm at the minute, but there's a deep-seated anxiety about the coming humanitarian crisis around food. Long before this was happening, there was major food shortages as a result of drought, as a result of the currency reducing. Basically, COVID really hit this country very hard because most people are informally employed, so they're just living hand to mouth day to day. So lockdowns devastated people. So people are very hungry. There's a lot of food insecurity. And so what is really complicated right now is trying to figure out with the food issues that are going on across the country, how are the aid agencies going to get in and feed people? Traditionally, the UN hasn't been able to operate in Taliban-controlled areas fully. They've been attacked by the Taliban. So if you're looking at the United Nations, various aid agencies that would normally go in and handle these kinds of crises, how are they going to be able to do that? They're not sure yet, even if airstrips will be working, whether the Taliban can guarantee them security. So that's a growing problem in the background that's not getting quite as much coverage, simply because this major crisis at the airport is, of course, sort of sucking up all the oxygen. And
to Major General Chip Chapman, we've seen this footage of a French plane leaving, and it's dropping sort of flares to deter any sort of heat-sensing missiles. I don't know if we can see those pictures. And that is a nod to the fact, is it not, that there is a real fear that Kabul, the airport there at Kabul, could be a target for ISIS, for terrorists. What pressure does that put on our troops who are there, who are, trying to keep their eye out for any potential terrorists in a crowd, suicide bombers, at the same time as holding babies in one hand? It's sort of mind-boggling to think what happens in the mind of a soldier who is on the ground, having to keep sort of all senses alert for hours on end.
Well, it puts a lot of pressure on them because you don't know which Taliban is going to turn up and where, and which part of ISK, that's Islamic State Khorasan. Now, it's worth saying that the Taliban are not a coherent organisation with coherent command and control, as you'd say, in a regular army. And that is why you'll have incidents of what they call Badal revenge all around Afghanistan. The IS franchise, Khorasan, is hated or hate the Taliban, and the Taliban hate them. The ISK call them the apostate Taliban, and they will be seeking to attack the British if they can infiltrate through the Taliban checkpoints. So it's a kaleidoscope of various groups who are often driven by their own clan and ethnic underpinnings, and also by income distribution, partly by the drug sort of trade in down in Helmand province. The real worry for me is that a very bad group, which was often the bridge between Al-Qaeda and the Taliban, called the Haqqani Network, are supposed to be coming to take over the security in Kabul. That worries me immensely in terms of the consent being enabled for the future.
Can I ask you a question that it's going to seem a bit naive, but I think about this a lot, which is Joe Biden seems to have unilaterally decided to leave, right? OK, fine, you want to leave, you leave. We've got a big military ourselves, right? We've got lots of money into our military. What would happen if we said, hang on a minute, you want to be selfish and only look after Americans, we want to look after the interpreters that helped us and some other people that Jane has already mentioned? What would happen if we just sent 10,000 troops out there to Kabul airport and said, all right, goodbye America on 31st of August, we'll take it from here? Why can't we take the lead instead of having to always follow America?
Well, the first thing is that Afghanistan is a landlocked country, so you're caveated by how robust your air bridge is. Our air transport fleet is not very robust. So to even contemplate getting 10,000 troops in with the sustainability of those troops would take you probably months to do. Right. That consent will be gone by then, because within that time frame, the Taliban will have a new constitution and will be ruling under some new authoritarian regime where their laws will apply. OK, thank you for that answer. That explained it really well. Jane, be safe. Good luck to you.
Just a quick question to Jane before you go. Would you feel safe still being there after August the 31st, or do you feel like you have to leave when the Americans leave?
The honest answer is we don't know, and it changes every day. Us journalists all keep talking, you know, what would it be like for us to be guests of the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan? And we're just not sure. I think we would probably be safe. I think Afghan journalists are at huge risk of reprisal attacks. But I think that international press are safer simply because the Taliban want the international community to stay in the country. But whether or not we'd be free to move around and do our jobs is another question. And that would influence my decision about staying.
OK, thank you. Jane Ferguson and Major General Chip Chapman, thank you for your insight. And as we say, Jane, you know, all the best to you and be safe out there.